He was a drifter, a phantom, moving from town to town. His name was Tommy Lynn Sells, and he left a trail of blood across America. He confessed to over 70 murders. This is a conservative estimate. Law enforcement believes the real number is far higher. Sells preyed on the vulnerable, breaking into homes and snuffing out innocent lives. His weapon of choice? A knife. It offered a personal touch, a way to look his victims in the eye as they breathed their last. For over 2 decades, Sells spread terror across the United States. From the dusty roads of the Southwest to the quiet suburbs of the Midwest, nowhere felt safe. He was the monster in your closet, the boogeyman under the bed, made flesh and blood. This is the story of Tommy Lynn Sells, the cross-country killer. His story is not for the faint of heart. It's a descent into the darkest corners of the human psyche, a chilling reminder that monsters often hide in plain sight. Tommy Lynn Sells was born into poverty, a harsh reality that would shape his entire existence. From the very beginning, life dealt him a cruel hand. He entered the world unwanted in Oakland, California in 1964. His birth was not a celebrated event but rather a burden to his struggling family. His twin sister died in infancy, a tragic event that left an indelible mark on his psyche. The loss of a sibling, especially a twin, is a profound trauma that can haunt a person for life. This early loss cast a dark shadow on his life, a shadow that would grow darker with each passing year. The absence of his twin left him feeling incomplete, as if a part of him was forever missing. His childhood was a bleak landscape of instability and abuse. The neighborhoods he grew up in were often run down and neglected, mirroring the chaos within his own home. Sells' mother, a single parent struggling to make ends meet, offered little in the way of love or guidance. She was overwhelmed by the demands of raising a child alone, and her own emotional turmoil left her ill-equipped to provide the nurturing environment that young Tommy so desperately needed. He was just a young boy when he began drifting from town to town with his family. The constant moving meant that he never had a chance to form stable friendships or feel a sense of belonging. They followed the whims of his mother, who sought work and stability but never found it. Each new town brought a fleeting hope that things might get better, but that hope was always dashed. Home was a series of dilapidated trailers and cheap motels, places that offered no sense of security or permanence. These transient living conditions only added to the instability of his young life. Violence became a constant companion. It was not just the physical violence that scarred him, but the emotional and psychological abuse that left deep, invisible wounds. Sells was abused, both physically and sexually, by various individuals throughout his childhood. These experiences shattered his sense of self-worth and trust in others. These early traumas left deep scars on his soul. The pain and fear he endured were etched into his very being, shaping the person he would become. By the age of 10, he was already displaying disturbing behavior. The anger and frustration that had been building inside him began to manifest in troubling ways. He was prone to fits of rage and violence, lashing out at those around him. These outbursts were a cry for help, a desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos in his life. He began torturing animals, a chilling foreshadowing of the horrors he would later inflict on humans. This behavior was a clear indication of the deep-seated issues that plagued him. The line between right and wrong blurred, twisted by the abuse he had endured. His moral compass was shattered, leaving him adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. He ran away from home repeatedly, seeking solace in drugs and alcohol, numbing the pain that gnawed at his insides. These substances offered a temporary escape, but they also led him down a dark and dangerous path. Tommy Lynn Sells had a modus operandi that was as simple as it was terrifying. He was a man who thrived in the shadows, a predator who found his calling in the dead of night. His methods were chillingly straightforward yet devastatingly effective. He would roam the streets, his eyes scanning for the slightest sign of vulnerability. A window left open, a door unlocked. These were the opportunities he sought, the small lapses in security that would become the gateways to his horrific acts. He was a predator who stalked the night. The darkness was his ally, the silence his accomplice. He moved with a predatory grace, his footsteps barely a whisper against the pavement. Each night, he would set out with a singular purpose, driven by an insatiable hunger for control and domination. The night was his hunting ground, and he was the apex predator. He would often target homes that appeared vulnerable, homes with unlocked doors or open windows. These were the signs he looked for, the subtle indicators that a family inside was unsuspecting, unprepared for the horror that was about to befall them. He had an uncanny ability to sense weakness, to identify the homes where his presence would go unnoticed until it was too late. He was a shadow slipping through the darkness, unnoticed and unheard. His movements were calculated, each step taken with the precision of a seasoned hunter. He knew how to blend into the night, to become one with the shadows that cloaked him. His approach was silent, his presence a mere whisper in the wind. By the time his victims realized he was there, it was already too late. His victims were often families, people sleeping soundly in their beds, unaware of the danger lurking just outside their doors. They were ordinary people, living ordinary lives, blissfully ignorant of the nightmare that was about to shatter their world. He took advantage of their trust, their belief that their homes were sanctuaries, safe from the evils of the outside world. He would break in, his movements swift and silent. He had honed his skills to perfection, each break-in a testament to his meticulous planning and execution. He knew how to pick locks, how to disable alarms, how to move through a house without making a sound. His entry was always smooth, almost effortless, a prelude to the chaos that would soon follow. He preferred using a knife, relishing the up-close and personal nature of his crimes. The knife was an extension of his will, a tool that allowed him to exert his dominance in the most intimate way possible. He took a perverse pleasure in the act, the sensation of the blade cutting through flesh, the sight of blood glistening in the moonlight. It was a ritual for him, a dark ceremony that he performed with a twisted sense of reverence. He enjoyed the control it gave him, the power he held over his victims in their final moments. In those fleeting seconds, he was the master of their fate, the arbiter of their lives. He reveled in their fear, their desperate attempts to escape, to plead for mercy. It was a game to him, a sick and twisted game where he always held the winning hand. There was a perverse intimacy to his killings. He was not content with simply ending a life. He wanted to experience it, to feel the life drain away under his hands. The act of binding his victims, of watching their terror mount as they realized their fate, was an integral part of his ritual. It was a dance of death, a macabre performance that he choreographed with chilling precision. He would often bind his victims, prolonging their terror, savoring their fear. The bindings were not just physical restraints, they were symbols of his control, his dominance over their lives. He took his time, drawing out the moments of fear and pain, relishing each second as if it were a fine wine. Their struggles, their pleas for mercy, only fueled his sadistic desires. He took pleasure in their pain, their pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. To him, their suffering was a symphony, a cacophony of despair that he conducted with ruthless efficiency. He was deaf to their cries, blind to their tears. Their pain was his pleasure, their fear his fuel. He was a maestro of misery, orchestrating their final moments with a cold, calculated cruelty. He saw himself as judge, jury, and executioner, delivering his own twisted brand of justice. In his mind, he was not a monster but a righteous avenger, meting out punishment to those he deemed deserving. His sense of justice was warped, a dark reflection of his own inner turmoil. He believed he was right, that his actions were justified, even as he left a trail of broken lives in his wake. His crimes were fueled by a potent cocktail of anger, resentment, and a profound lack of empathy. He was a man consumed by his own demons, driven by a rage that he could not control. His victims were merely outlets for his fury, scapegoats for his own failures and frustrations. He lashed out at the world, striking down those who crossed his path with a vengeance that knew no bounds. He was a void, incapable of remorse, a black hole that consumed the lives of his victims, leaving behind only unimaginable grief and despair. In his wake, he left a trail of shattered families, of lives torn apart by his senseless violence. The pain he inflicted was not just physical but emotional, a deep, abiding wound that would never fully heal. He was a harbinger of sorrow, a bringer of nightmares, a terror in the night. One of Tommy Lynn Sells' most chilling crimes unfolded on New Year's Eve 1999 in the small town of Del Rio, Texas. This quiet town, known for its close-knit community and peaceful nights, was about to be shaken to its core by an act of unspeakable violence. The residents of Del Rio had no idea that a monster was lurking in their midst, ready to shatter their sense of security and peace. It was a night meant for celebration, for ringing in the new year with hope and joy. Families gathered, friends reunited, and the air was filled with laughter and the promise of new beginnings. Fireworks lit up the sky, symbolizing the bright future everyone hoped for. But amidst the celebrations, darkness was creeping into one family's home, turning their night of joy into a nightmare. But for the family of Kayleen Harris, it became a night of unimaginable horror. The Harris family, like many others, had been looking forward to the new year, making plans and dreaming of what was to come. Little did they know, their lives were about to be irrevocably changed by a man whose only intent was to bring pain and suffering. Sells broke into their home, his eyes dark with malice. He moved with a sinister purpose, his heart devoid of any empathy or remorse. The quiet of the night was shattered as he made his way through the house, his presence a harbinger of doom. The shadows seemed to cling to him as if even the darkness itself was afraid of what he was about to do. He had come to kill. Armed with a knife, his intentions were clear and deadly. The blade gleamed in the dim light, a cold and unforgiving instrument of death. Sells was a predator, and his prey was the innocent family that lay unsuspecting in their beds. His mind was set on causing as much pain and terror as possible. Katie, a bright and bubbly 13-year-old girl, was the only one who awoke to the sounds of an intruder. She had been dreaming of the new year, her mind filled with the innocent hopes and dreams of a young girl. But those dreams were abruptly shattered as she was jolted awake by the presence of a stranger in her room. She stumbled upon Sells, her eyes widening in horror as she realized the danger she was in. The sight of him, a menacing figure in the darkness, filled her with a terror she had never known. Her heart raced as she tried to comprehend the nightmare that was unfolding before her. Sells, caught off guard, reacted with swift and brutal violence. He lunged at Katie, his movements quick and deadly. The struggle was brief but intense, a horrifying clash between innocence and evil. Katie fought with all her might, but she was no match for the ruthless killer. He stabbed Katie repeatedly, silencing her screams before they could escape her lips. The room was filled with the sickening sound of the knife plunging into her flesh, a gruesome symphony of violence. Blood splattered across the room, a stark reminder of the brutality of the attack. He then turned his attention to Katie's friend, Crystal Searles, who was sleeping in the same room. Crystal, unaware of the horror that had just occurred, was about to be thrust into a nightmare of her own. Her peaceful slumber was shattered as she awoke to the sight of her friend's lifeless body and the menacing figure of Sells standing over her. Crystal, just 10 years old, awoke to the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. The terror she felt was indescribable, a primal fear that gripped her heart and soul. She was just a child, but in that moment, she was forced to confront a horror that no one should ever have to face. Sells, his face splattered with Katie's blood, loomed over her, a malevolent grin twisting his lips. The sight of him, covered in the blood of her friend, was a vision of pure evil. His grin was a cruel mockery of the fear and pain he had caused, a twisted expression of his sadistic pleasure. He told her he wouldn't hurt her if she stayed quiet. His words were a lie, a cruel deception meant to keep her silent and compliant. But Crystal, despite her fear, knew that she had to survive. She had to find a way to escape the clutches of this monster. He then fled into the night, leaving Crystal alive but forever scarred by the horrors she had witnessed. The darkness swallowed him as he disappeared, but the terror he left behind would never fade. Crystal was left alone, traumatized and terrified, but she was also determined to survive. It was Crystal's bravery and resilience that would ultimately bring Sells to justice. Despite the trauma she had endured, she found the strength to speak out, to tell her story, and to ensure that Sells could never harm another innocent soul. Her courage was a beacon of hope in the darkness, a testament to the strength of the human spirit.